Last week, as we know, Jesus laid into the Pharisees of the nation of Israel with some incredibly powerful truth bombs. I mean, he just, blah. And he leaves the temple, never to step on the temple grounds until he comes back. And as he's leaving the temple grounds in Jerusalem, Jesus is steaming mad, and the disciples are like, wow, the temple is cool. And Jesus, as he's walking by, he's walking out, and he listens to the disciples compliment and talk about how amazing this temple is. He says in Matthew chapter 24, verse 2, you see all these? Do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. I think at this point the disciples realized, I think we might have missed something. Disciples getting caught up in the grandeur of how amazing this building is and how incredibly, they're just in awe of it. And this is right after Jesus completely rebuked the entire system and the nation of Israel. And he flat out says, this place is going to be torn down to the place that not one block is going to be set on top of another. And he keeps walking. I think you can feel it right here. Disciples like, oh man, and here Jesus is. They're chasing after him, and they chase after him, they run up. It says in verse 3, as he sat on the Mount of Olives. Now, the Mount of Olives was a mountain that it overlooked Jerusalem, but it overlooked very specifically the grounds of the temple. And so here he is, and Jesus is sitting up there. And there's probably some thoughts of some frustration. The disciples come up and they say to him privately, tell us when these things will be. And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? They could not imagine a time where the temple would be that flattened. See, to them, if the temple has been destroyed to that level, pretty much we must be at the end of the age. Time's finished. It'd be very similar to, if you guys ever seen Independence Day or some apocalyptic movie, okay? Have you guys noticed what usually happens in those things? The Empire State Building is usually destroyed, or the Statue of Liberty's head is rolling down the middle of Main Street, okay? That's it. Because in our minds, the end of the world is symbolized by the Statue of Liberty's head crushing into New York City. If you have any questions, did you guys see Planet of the Apes, the old school version? What did Charleston have to do? Because they saw the Statue of Liberty. That is how we picture it. The end of the age will happen when New York City is flattened. That's what we think. And so when the disciples are looking and they hear Jesus saying, this place is going to be flattened, they're thinking the same thing. Well, if the temple's gone, when's this going to happen? When's this going to be destroyed? When's the end of the age? Tell us. And they ask a question, and to them, I believe they asked one of those big questions. Trying to say, hey, so tell us, when will these things be, and what is the sign? So I think they're asking one big question. Tell us the future. Tell us. What's going to happen? And when Jesus responds, he breaks and splits up this question into two giant sections that we know as the Olivet Discourse. And I said this week that the Olivet Discourse is one of those passages that you can read the passage like 50 times in a row. And if you think you have it all figured out, just read it one more time. It was happening to me this morning. I was like, shoot, I can't keep reading this or I'm going to be all messed up. So it is a passage that is just, it's epic in the ramifications. Jesus paints this picture of what's going to happen to the nation of Israel, and it can be intense. And so this week, he answers the first part of their question about the signs in verses 4 through 36, I believe, 4 through 35, that's it. And so he goes, and this is how he answers the first one, all right? And this is sort of marked by, he says in chapter 24, verse 4, he says, "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead you astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet." And so the first part of Jesus' answer warns people, stop looking and reading into stuff. Stop looking for the signs. Stop sign hunting. It's going to get you trapped. It's going to get you caught. So don't hunt those down. And that's how he answers the first part of their question. He starts explaining the signs. But then in verse 36, if you guys look there, he says, "But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son." And so then he answers part 2 of their question, which is when it's going to happen. We don't have enough time to study the entire passage. So we are studying the first part here, verses 4 through 35 here this week, and the next week we're going to hit the second part of it. That's why I encouraged you last week to read it. Hopefully you did, and maybe you got stuck in the cycle. I don't understand this, and you just kept reading it over and over and over and over again. Great. Same thing for this next week. Read the whole passage again, all of Matthew 24 to get caught up, so when we hit part 2, you remember part 1, and we can flow right into what's going on there in the second part. So now, as we start studying this Olivet Discourse, there's a couple things to remember. So the Olivet Discourse is a teaching specifically on something that we call eschatology, which is study of the end times. So anytime some pastor uses the fancy word eschatology, you will know end times. Escha's end, tology is study. Boom. You're experts now, okay? It's a study of the end. And that's what this is. The Olivet Discourse is stuff that's going to happen into the future in eschatology. Now, as you guys know, because you guys have probably had studies in Daniel, we did that here, I think 1.5 years or 2 years ago or something. And some of you have had study on Revelation. Some of you have read Left Behind books or watched movies. Or maybe you were into Harold Camping back when he was pretending the end of the age. Whatever it could be, we like to know what the future is going to be, right? We want to know the Vegas odds, Super Bowl winners. We want to know the future of the event. Back to the Future, guys. You guys know that movie, right? They totally love to mess around with the future. We like, if we think we could know the future, would like to know it. But there's a couple things we have to be really leery on. We've got to make some things to remember. So anytime that we begin to study eschatology, these are like 5 sort of reminders that we have to remember. Literally, you guys might want to put this in your Bible, do it in your own words, whatever it is. These are important things. Anytime we start to think of the future and passages in the future, we want to remember these things, all right? I'm going to leave this up here for a little while, but I would encourage. So the first one is we need to try and answer the why is supposed to be the writer. Put this in his letter. Why did Matthew record this here? Writers, and the writers of these letters they don't like to hear themselves talk and they're not writing. They had a purpose. They had if you want to say an agenda. Agenda sounds so bad nowadays, but the fact is when a writer writes, he has a purpose why he is writing. He's trying to convince people. He's trying to bring information to bear. This is always important to remember is the why. And why this is important, because anytime we can study end time stuff, sometimes we can get lost in all of the other stuff, what the rest of the writers say, and we make the rest of the writers make Matthew what he's supposed to be saying, or another guy. So John wrote the book of Revelation, and we make sure that we try to bring in all these other writers instead of just understanding what the writer is trying to say. What is Matthew trying to say here? What is whatever writer? So always ask yourself the question, why is this here? What was Matthew's intention to communicate this, all right? The second one is we always want to use our common sense, and I say this, is because we want to start with the easy to understand. We do not want to try and explain the whole passage based on how we take something very confusing. And guys, look, it's not sometimes Bible study is made out to be some rocket science. It's not. Honestly, if we just slow down for a few minutes and just read it slowly, and if we didn't get it, start over and read slowly, and start over and read slowly, you know what happens? We honestly begin to understand. It's not rocket science. Now, we can read there. Now, there are occasionally, and I will admit, there are occasional passages, occasional verses where we're like, I do not get that at all. I don't even get what he's trying to say. That's fair enough. It happens. We don't want to explain the whole passage, though, on those things that are harder to understand. We want to use the easy to understand stuff and have that help us to explain the hard, not use the hard and have that try to explain the easy. Just like in math. Could you imagine if they started you doing algebra before they started making you do, addition and subtraction? You would look at your teacher like he's nuts. That's the alphabet. That's not math. We use the easy to begin to understand the hard, not the other way around. We also want to treat prophecy like we're trying to look into the windows of a moving train. If you guys have ever had the privilege of being in a large city or anywhere and you get to watch the subway or maybe you get to watch the shuttle or whatever it is at the airport, have you guys ever tried to look at what's going on in there? Like the only thing you see are the crazy images. The guy with the way too much hair or, whatever. I mean, you don't get to see a lot, don't you? It just flies by and all you're seeing are the windows and just images, quick images. You're like, okay, that happened. This is what prophecy is. Prophecy is us trying, God being gracious enough and letting us see images in the window of a subway train that is flying way too fast. He lets us to get these images, and these images help us see what's going on in the train, but we're not going to have all the details. You won't exactly know what's in that subway train until it stops. I also recommend that you use caution. Your views of the Old Testament or your view of end times, of eschatology, impacts your Christianity. Your view of what happens in the future, what's going to happen in the future, impacts your Christianity. And don't let anybody try to trick you on this, because if you're dating someone, if you don't think there's any chance whatsoever that you're ever going to get with that person, what do? You give up. You move on. You find other fish in the sea, as it said. If you don't think there's any hope, you generally stop. It's the same thing in your Christianity. If you don't think there's any hope at the end, why does it matter? How you view the future impacts your Christian life now. And so what this means, though, is we have to use caution. I was just saying, because we're not going to know everything. And then lastly, I really encourage you guys to remember the character of God who has it all planned out. Because sometimes when we read passages that happen, it sounds mean. Vera and I have had that conversation before. She's like, that just sounds mean. Yeah, Vera, it does sound mean. But sadly, the human race deserves it. And sadly, the human race deserves the holy judgment of a righteous God. And so that's sometimes hard to swallow. And so we have to remember the character. When sometimes we're reading this, we're like, if I were a God, I wouldn't do that. That's right. You're not one. Ding. So careful. And so sometimes, though, we have to remember that sometimes it is hard to, but we still have to remember the character of God. Yes, God is a graceful God. He is a merciful God. But he is also a righteous God, and he is a holy God. And those things can be a little hard to, as we see, play out there. So now we've got that taken care of, okay? Really encourage you just to remember these things. Let's get going here on all of the discourse. So verse 3, it says, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ. And they will lead many astray, and they will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famine and earthquake in various places. All these are but a beginning of the birth pains. What Jesus says is this: Ladies, I think we can understand, not we as in, but y'all, because I don't understand it, okay, is I think you can understand when someone talks about Braxton Hicks, you are like, yes, I know what those felt like. And I can vouch for Nikki is, it's not like she could plan them. I would like it to pain to kick in now. Okay, good. They just come out of nowhere. And that's what Jesus is saying right here. Rumors of wars and roars and all these bad things are going to happen. That's just Braxton Hicks. That's just birthing pains. That's just a contraction. Like, that's just a contraction? What? That's pretty much what Jesus is saying. Because when we think of wars, when we think of bad stuff, oh no, we're all going to die. I mean, I am thankful that for the most part, our world has been relatively peaceful for a while. I mean, I could only fear if two first world powers actually went to war again. And I think there's a reason why we don't, is because both sides realize it's going to be epic. It is going to be something we can't even imagine. Very similar to how World War II played out between Nazi Germany and the United States and the Soviet Union as they are battling on all these fronts. Those soldiers hadn't seen anything that vicious in their life. It's only going to get worse because our bombs have only gotten bigger. Our guns have only gotten more powerful. I thank the Lord that it has not happened yet. But anytime we hear, and I've heard people talk about it, like, oh, the world's coming to an end. Oh, see all those earthquakes. Yeah, see, it's just signs of the time. Like, nope, it's just a sign of a birth pain. It's what it is. What Jesus literally says is tragedies do not necessarily mean the end of the world. That is a hard truth to swallow. Because tragedies suck. They're mean. People die. Terrible things happen. And Jesus is like, yes. Yeah. Don't follow the first person who says, oh, the end of the world. She's like, no. And we think about it, when Jesus said this, it's almost been 2,000 years since then. You know how many wars we've had since then? You know how many earthquakes we've had since then? You know how many people have died over the last 2,000 years? Pretty sure more people have died today than ever in the history of mankind. It's insane to fathom, but Jesus is just like, do not rush and lead. Do not follow the doom and gloom stuff. These are not signs. These are just the beginning of birth pains. Tragedies do not mean that it is necessarily going to be the end. And then he says in verse 9, all right? So let's keep going there. He says, so then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. So if you want to sort of get this feel, when we talked about a prophecy sort of like a window. You guys notice how many ands were in that passage? They will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. And you'll be hated by all. I think like each and marks a window. And many will fall away. And betray one another. And hate one another. And many false prophets will arise. And lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased. And this gospel of the kingdom. You guys got that? You got the theme there? This is all, Jesus is literally just describing an entire block of time. And he's like, this is going to happen, this is going to end up happening. Now he says in verse 9, he starts talking, he says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation, all right? And it seems to begin, so he's talked, earthquakes, don't worry about those. But he starts saying, like, hey, you will be given over to tribulation and put to death. You will be hated by all for my name's sake. And when I want to zoom in on the my name's sake, I think that helps to see who Jesus is talking about. Because to identify with Jesus was a huge change. It was a huge shift in regards to many Jews. Because that means they are recognizing Jesus as the Messiah. And as we know, it plays out sometime later is the church was born. And many of these Jewish Christians actually were a part of the church. Then the church spread and went off and joined with the Gentiles. And you have this giant, awesome conglomerate known as the church, but the church exists because it identifies with Jesus. Any church that doesn't identify with Jesus, not a very good church. And so you will be hated by all because of me, because of Jesus, because of his name. He describes this, many will fall away, many will betray each other and hate one another. And there'll be false prophets that'll come up and they will lead many astray. And lawlessness, as a result, lawlessness will be increased and the love of many will grow cold. It says the one who endures to the end will be saved. And that verse is a little hard to figure out. What's Jesus trying to say here? Because if Jesus is identifying with this group of disciples, that's, okay, well, I mean, you have two ways to take it. So the one who endures to the end will be saved. That could mean if you survive a catastrophe, see, you're saved. Well, duh. It's like if you don't die, you live. Got it. I don't think he's trying to say that because, I mean, literally, that'd be like duh in the Bible. It doesn't make any sense to me. And so what's he saying? And I know a lot of people like to make this idea of enduring to the end where it becomes a man-made effort to live in our own righteousness. And if we happen to succeed and live in our own righteousness and make it to the end, then God rescues. And we know, theologically and stuff, I cannot in my own power live a righteous life. It is only through the work of God in my life. But I think what we have to remember is that a righteous life is produced by the work of God. And a work of God is going to continue in your life no matter what's going on around you. And so the statement, the one who endures to the end will be saved, that is evidence. Those who endure to the end will be saved because the only ones able to endure to the end are those who have had the work of God in their life and are living out. Makes sense? I want to say that. So it's not like, oh man, I lived a perfect life until the car hit me and I swore just as it crashes into me. Well, you're going to hell. You said a naughty word before the bus killed you. I think many of us would have some thought of, oh no, bleep. It's typically what happens, okay? It's just, that doesn't mean, oh, you didn't endure to the end. You're going to hell. That's not what it means, okay? And so this is not some man-made, self-made righteousness attempt. No, this is, what Jesus is saying is those who make it to the end and endure and are not led astray by the false prophets and aren't betraying one another and walk that out. That is evidence that I am with them and they are with me and that they are doing it for my name's sake. And so that is evidence that they are who they say they are, and are Christians. In verse 14 it says, and this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. And this is why prophecy gets really, 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 really confusing. Because is verses 9 through 13 referring to the disciples and their generation, or is it referring to the future generations when hell on earth is coming? Don't answer that out loud, because honestly, you can read them both ways, and you're like, And then you reread the passage again, and you're like, I will say this. I think what happened in the disciples' life and what happened that played out in there is a picture of what is to come for the people of God. I do. I think the persecution they went through is a picture of what's going to happen to Christians later. I think the wars that we've been experiencing and what the nation of Israel went through and things like that, I think that is a picture of what's going to come. Because the wars have just gotten worse, haven't they? I mean, it's not like a bunch of bow and arrow people now. If you want to compare that war, 100-year English war, with the French that shoot each other with a bunch of bows, one guy with a machine gun could have killed the entire British army. We haven't even, all it is taste of what is to come. And so that's how I read this. Either way, I'm not like, oh no, you read the passage wrong, because we're like, okay, we know that they, the disciples, were put to death and will be hated by all for my name's sake. But Jesus might have taken a step back. And when he says you, he might actually be identifying with y'all, as in the nation of Israel itself is going to go through some horrendous, terrible time. If you guys want to look at how bad a war got for them, just look at the Jewish revolt against Rome that happened just a few years later, and how Rome systematically destroyed Jerusalem. And how in Jerusalem, while they are rebelling and trying to get their freedom from Rome, they decided the best course of action would be to attack each other while they're being sieged and kill each other's food supplies while they're fighting the Romans. I mean, that just gives you a taste that, they're betraying one another and they're backstabbing each other. That's the worst thing. That's the last thing you want to do, is try to go to fight against the Roman legions while stabbing each other in the back. That's what they did. It's just a picture of how bad things are going to get. And this shows us the second point here, is that the people of Jesus will be persecuted, but their message will keep spreading. He says in verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom, the good news of the kingdom, will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. And see, that's why you can view this sort of two ways. If you view it as this group of disciples, see, as they went through and as they were persecuted, as Christians and people who claimed the name of Jesus, as they were being persecuted and attacked, the gospel spread. See, when Rome started to crack down, and I know this has happened a few times, but when persecution started to crack down on the nation, on the Christians, they had to run and flee their homes and spread. And you know what happened because of the persecution there? The Gentiles ended up with the gospel. And did you know they didn't even know that the United States of America, or the North and South America, even existed back then. And guess where the gospel is? On the farthest corner. Like Israel, us. We're pretty far away, aren't we? It's evidence that the gospel has spread all over the world. The gospel of the kingdom, the gospel that is very specifically focused on the person of Jesus Christ as the Messiah and the coming King. Or if we take it as a later thing, as the persecution begins once again, the good news of Jesus doesn't stop. Doesn't matter how bad things get. And I think that is just a huge blessing and encouragement. We can get frustrated right now in our life, but you know what? The message of Jesus is going out. It's going out with or without you. I'd rather jump on that bandwagon instead of jumping off. It is doing something. It is going to keep doing something. The people of Jesus will be persecuted, but that message is going to keep spreading. I think that is an encouragement. But then he says in verse 15, it says, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, and you guys see that parentheses, let the reader understand. Remember how we asked that question, why did Matthew want this? Why did Matthew put this in here? What's the point of Matthew doing this? I think this is an easy way of Matthew making sure of a very important point. See, the fate of Israel hasn't changed. It has always been as God has said. I think sometimes we can oh man, the world is so bad. No, nothing's changed. See, and by referring to that, by slowing us down, because it doesn't really fit with the text, does it? It's, doom and gloom, stop, let the reader get this. I think pretty much this print should have been black. It's usually red in your guys' Bible. Jesus is speaking it. This is what Matthew's saying. Guys, stop right here. Make note of this. When he says the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet, we should instantly stop what we're reading and go back to Daniel and study Daniel's chapter 11 and 12. Make note of that, guys. Go back and study that on your own, okay? So there in Matthew chapter 11 through 12, we see an incredibly detailed account of how the history of Israel will play out. We learn of an individual that will set up a desolation of the temple. And one occurrence has already happened of this. In 167 BC, a Seleucid king known as Antiochus Epiphanes got himself involved in a Jewish revolt. Man, them Jews always revolting. We do not know all the details, but what we do know is that he started to try and force the Jews to worship the Greek god Zeus. Well, you know how that went over. And they refused, and so he thought the best way to pretty much just poke the bear was to build an altar in the temple and kill a pig and offer it to Zeus in the temple of God. Okay, I'm talking I know the Islam has the sort of thing on going nuts. They got nothing on this. Israel went ballistic. Yeah, a bunch of people died. It was insane. But if we're talking about that desolation that happened, but that happened in the past. So here Jesus is mentioning it again? Yeah. See, once again, that event that happened in the past, that's just a type of what's to come. And if everything keeps getting worse, how much more worse is it going to get? And this is what I say. So he mentions a holy place. You realize that the nation of Israel doesn't have a holy place at the moment. I just want to put a thought. Now, once again, I'm using caution here. But that means something else probably has to go down. Dome of the Rock. And a temple has to be built. I hope in a way, it'd be really cool if Jesus came back now. But you want to see craziness play out? Imagine the Dome of the Rock getting blown up or something. I don't know what's going to happen. I have no idea. But there has to be an abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place. Oh, yeah. But what's good to remember is when Matthew stops us here, this is where Matthew is giving us permission to bring in what else we know from other apocalyptic literature, other literature that's talking about end times. And he specifically says, go back to Daniel and read it. As there is this guy who's coming, who is going to make life miserable for the Jewish people. It is still going to come. And that's the good to remember is the fate of Israel hasn't changed. It's not because Israel is rejecting God and we know that Jesus starts the church and some people are like, there's no more history for Israel. No, Jesus is saying the history for Israel is still going to play out exactly like God said in the Old Testament. Okay, that's what we just got to know. There is still a future for the nation of Israel. Jesus says it. He says it's going to happen in the end. And Jesus, being God, knows exactly what's going to happen in the future. And he's sort of given him a hint. So let's not try to, let's take it as, face value and keep it simple. There's still a future for Israel. It hasn't changed. So let's keep going here. So he says, verse 16, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. You know, in natural disasters, we like to go back down in our house and grab stuff. We are dumb. Okay, this is straight, okay? And so he said, don't do that. Don't go back into your house. Let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. This is how bad the disaster is going to hit. Jesus is not mincing words here. He's not softening this up. He literally says, if you are not an able-bodied person, parents of young children, you're toast. Well, that stinks. Me and Petra are going out with a bang, That's what it means. He's not mincing words. It is going to hit hard, and it's going to hit fast, where the person who turns says, I got to get my coat. Boom, done. It is going to be that bad and that fierce of what's going to happen. He says, pray that your flight may not be in winter. You guys ever traveled in the winter? It's not a good time to travel. Or on the Sabbath, on your day of rest. God, you said I'm not supposed to be working, but there's a disaster coming. Do I get up or go? Too late. Done. This is how bad it's going to be. This puts it in a perspective where, we have rumors of war, and people go to war, they usually announce it to each other, and they usually know, and they usually can react. This is going to hit so fast and so swift, people aren't going to be able to catch up. This is how fierce this is going to be. It gets so bad, he says, that there will be great tribulation. No, hold on. So I want to make sure you guys catch this. So verses 16 through 20, that can sound really, really terrible. Right? Nursing moms, what did they ever do to anybody? The guy just needed his coat. He was cold. And God's a bully. Picking on pregnant mommies and, birthing mommies and just picking on mommies. We can take that, what I call a very self-righteous position, and condemn God. You guys have probably heard it before, where God's just a big bully. I think we should be honest, though. Every single one of us deserve that. As soon as we opened our mouth and sinned in any way, we deserve complete and full punishment for all eternity, because we have violated and offended the holiness of God. And in my pride, I don't like that. So I'm like, maybe I deserve just a little less, God. No. So don't get on your high horses and say that God is a big meanie. Just say, thank you, Lord, that won't be me. Thank you, Lord, that you saved me. Thank you, Lord, that if I happen to get caught by that tsunami because I decided to hesitate and grab my coat, that I have a future in heaven with you. Thank you. I think it's something to remember. Because we can insult the character of God and make him out to be a big bully. But we have to remember, we deserve it. Our sin deserves that punishment. And he says in verse 21, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been found from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. Imagine what Jesus is saying here. There is no recovery from this. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would live. But for the sake of those who God has chosen, those days will be cut short. And this is just a thing where God, in his judgment, I think you can read the book of Revelation and you can see this played out, is so intense and so massive. And God's punishment on the whole earth is so bad. People are dying left and right so fast. It is so terrible. It is so vicious. And Jesus says there is nothing and there will never be anything like it, where the world will experience the wrath of God in a way that is completely unimaginable. So, it says, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. Verse 24, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray. And if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Behold, he comes, and he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. There will be absolutely no confusion when Jesus comes back. None. You can't miss it. When Jesus comes back, you guys catch that. So when they are lying to you and saying, look, this is the real Messiah. No. Any Messiah that comes now, you're not going to miss it. Jesus came, his first time on earth, that was the nice, meek, humble, not scary. When he comes back again, you're not going to miss it. He is going to be arrayed in all of his glory, and it is so intense. You guys notice that the tribes of the earth will mourn? They will even know it's happening. They might not even believe in a Jesus, and they're like, what? It's him. It says the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. It's going to be pitch black. And the powers of earth, it feels like the whole earth, the heavens are just caving in on the earth. And then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. That sign that you're asking for is going to be a big, bright, giant, lightning bolt worthy, awesome event that the whole earth is going to see. You're not going to miss it. That's going to be so cool. It says he sends out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect. They will gather God's people, those who happen to be left. Because remember, he said before, like all hell on earth, and the only reason why not everybody doesn't die is because God has decided to spare them. And he spares some. And you guys look at verse 28. You guys catch that? Wherever the corpse is, there where the vultures will gather. You imagine the birds and the smell. Just smelling a dead rat that has been under your house for a little bit longer than it should have been stinks. Blood smells. Blech. It's going to be gross, disgusting, terrible. The wrath is going to be poured out. And then when it just feels like there's no more I can take, it's done. Jesus Christ comes back and everyone knows it. And the nations know it too, and they're mourning because they're like, our time has come. I think that's awesome. There's no confusion when Jesus Christ comes back. That's just saying. So you're looking for a sign? This is your sign. So tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age. And Jesus says, well, when there's hell on earth, and everyone is dying, everyone is dying. And then when the heavens open up, and then when the heavens are collapsing in and it feels like heaven itself is attacking the planet, and then it stops and there's a bright light, and you see a guy coming across the sky, yeah, that's your sign. You're not going to miss it. If you think about it, you're like, that didn't quite answer my question. You're right. He didn't. Because it's not for them to know. But we're going to get the idea. It's going to happen quickly. And so he continues in the last few says, from the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts on its leaves, you know that the summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So Jesus is like, what I say is going to happen. But then you can look there at that verse 24, and you're like, I say this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. And we're like, who's he talking about there? And we get very wrapped up in like, well, if he's talking about the disciples, and some people take that, then what it says is what Jesus has described will happen in the life of the disciples. But I say no, because did hell on earth happen over the entire world when the temple was torn down? No, many places didn't even know what was happening. They didn't. China had no idea that Rome was attacking Jerusalem. There wasn't hell on earth. And that's why when I take verse 24, all these things will take place. The generation that starts seeing hell on earth happen to them, that generation, it's not going to be a prolonged event. That generation will not pass away until all those things take place. You guys get it? So generation, like it's like a millennial generation, baby boomer generation. Okay, I think that's sort of the idea. It's a whole lot shorter than that, okay? Because those are like 30 years. But what he's saying is with the generation that begins to experience this, that generation is going to happen that fast. It's not going to be some prolonged 100-year death. It's going to be really fast, really concentrated. That generation will witness the end of the world and the coming of Jesus Christ. And it will happen. So as we end, what is Matthew? What are some things we can get? 1, do not follow false Christ, no matter how convincing they are. It's going to happen. People are going to try to sway you and bring you and get you to turn on anybody but the real Jesus. Don't. We've read about Jesus coming here, and this Jesus told us flat out, when he comes, we're not going to miss him again. Wait for the big bright light in the sky. 2, the future hasn't changed. What God said at the beginning is what is going to happen. God is complete. God is in complete and full control. And I think that is an awesome thing that we follow and trust a God that knows exactly what's going to happen. It hasn't changed. And lastly, so I think this is where we use caution, but our view of the future should impact our lives now, is the realization that judgment is coming should motivate us to share the gospel of the kingdom with others. And if you are not, and I really want to ask you, I really want to ask you, do we not realize how bad it's going to be? Or do we just not care enough about people to know that's going to happen? Are we letting our own fear of being offended and insulted by somebody impact? I tried sharing the gospel with somebody this last week, and I got stone cold rejected. I did. And I could have left there and be like, he doesn't like me, and just walk away. No, poor guy, I'm going to go see him next week. Because he's important to me. He is. And I think this should motivate us. Judgment's coming. And it's going to be intense, and it is going to be scary. So please read Matthew chapter 24. And next week, we're going to be studying again. And like I said, we're going to study next week, and it's going to almost sound contradictory to everything we said today. Welcome to the Olivet.